All right, let's jump right in. We usually think about history as this long story of kings and wars and big empires. But what if I told you there's a deeper engine running under the hood, a kind of hidden blueprint that explains the entire sweep of human society? Well, today we're digging into a really powerful idea that history is actually the story of technology and how it shapes capital. So let's start with the biggest question of all. Just forget the daily news cycle for a second and think on a grand scale. What is the one single force that has pushed humanity from, small tribes all the way to the complex global world we live in today? The source material for this explainer gives a surprisingly simple, straight up answer. It's technology, right? The development of our tools, our methods, our ability to control the world around us, that is the fundamental driver of every single societal change. But technology can't do it alone. It needs something to work on, some gears to turn. And those gears are what this theory calls the five capitals. Just think of them as the different kinds of power and value that exist in any society. Whichever one of these is the most important at any given time, well, that determines everything. How society is built, who holds the power, and what people are willing to fight for. Let's see how this all plays out in practice. So, let's rewind the clock, way back to the dawn of humanity. This was a time when life wasn't about making a profit or gaining power. It was about one thing and one thing only, just trying to survive. In this really early period, when productivity was incredibly low, your most valuable asset wasn't something you owned. It was who you were connected to. Your family, your clan, your social bonds. This is what the theory calls personality capital. Resources weren't handed out to make a profit. They were shared for one simple reason, to make sure the tribe could survive its constant fight against nature. And I mean, look at this. The dominance here is just staggering. It's not even close. Personality capital is everything. The other forms of capital, they barely even show up on the radar. Your standing in the community was pretty much all that mattered. But then, technology changed the game. As we got better at making things, the main struggle in life totally shifted. It wasn't just us against nature anymore. Now it was becoming us against us, a fight to control all this new wealth that was being created. The logic here is really simple, but so powerful. So better tools mean you can produce more than you need to survive, right? You got a surplus. And as soon as there's a surplus, someone is going to want to take it. In a time when resources like land were everywhere, but people to do the work were scarce, the best way to control that surplus was to control the workers themselves. And just like that, human capital becomes the new prize. And boom, the whole balance of power just flips. Personality capital, it shrunk way down in importance. And a brand new dominant force has shot to the top. Human capital, the control of other people's labor. This is what defines the entire age of slavery. But history never sits still. As populations got bigger and bigger, a totally new problem popped up. All of a sudden, labor wasn't the rare thing anymore. Now it was the land and the tools you needed to work the land. So the center of power shifted again, from owning people to owning the means of production. And the result is crystal clear. Production means capital shoots right to the top. The big question in society was now, who owns the land? Who owns the mill, the plow? That's who was in charge. And that's the bedrock of the feudal system, right? You had lords who controlled the means of production and serfs who provided the labor. For centuries, wealth was all tied up in land. But here we go again. Technological progress, which led to even more production, was about to trigger another massive earthquake in society. The world was about to be completely reshaped by commerce. Yeah, and this quote from the source material just hits the nail on the head. When you have an explosion of new goods being made, just owning the factory or the farm isn't the whole story anymore. The real power? It lies in controlling the exchange of all those goods. So here's the crucial turning point. Trade needs a medium of exchange. It needs money. And with that, monetary capital just rockets into the dominant spot. If you controlled the flow of money, you could control the flow of all goods. And if you could do that, you controlled how all resources were allocated. Welcome to the age of capitalism. But capitalism didn't stop there. It kept evolving. In our modern economy, with these massive surpluses, a new kind of imbalance shows up. Basically, not everyone who helps produce wealth actually has the power to buy it back. To sort of smooth over this tension, a much more sophisticated tool was invented. financial capital, this incredibly powerful mix of money and credit. Okay, now this part is absolutely critical for understanding the world we live in today. The very tool that was designed to solve a problem ends up becoming a problem itself. See, financial capital is driven by its own relentless need for profit. And when that goes unchecked, it doesn't just manage the imbalance, it makes it worse, triggering the kinds of economic crises and social conflicts that feel all too familiar. So let's just pause and take a breath here to recap this incredible journey. We went from social bonds to human labor to the means of production and finally to money and finance. Each stage was pushed forward by technology, and each one was defined by a different dominant form of capital. It's a really clear, logical progression when you lay it all out like this. This entire story, this whole historical arc, brings us right to where we are now. The theory goes that the crises created by our current system are actually pushing us, right now, toward the next great shift in society. And that forces us to ask the ultimate question, doesn't it? If the system we have is creating these intense imbalances, and technology is only going to make it all more extreme, where do we go from here? What's the solution? And you can see the symptoms all around us. Huge differences in the ability to create wealth, a major disconnect between what we produce and what we can afford to buy, and of course, the social conflicts that bubble up from all of it. The system is definitely feeling the strain. So, what's the answer? Well, the one proposed here is a fascinating full circle moment. The idea is that the next dominant form of capital will be a return to the very first one, personality capital, but with a major twist. Now hold on, this is not about going back to live in clans and tribes. Think of it as an evolution, a serious upgrade. The idea is that in the future, how we allocate resources won't be driven purely by profit. Instead, it'll be guided by a new, formalized system of shared social values and goals, almost like an institutionalized form of community, but on a global scale. So, as we're all grappling with the crises of our time, the suggestion here is that we are fundamentally reevaluating what we even value as a society. And it leaves us with this final, powerful question to think about. As we move beyond an age dominated by pure finance, what kind of future, based on what kind of values, are we actually trying to build?